What is up, Sopranos fans? It's me, Kino, and you guys know what this is. It's me doing my favorite thing in the world, which is talking about The Sopranos. We have finally reached the third season, and I just want to thank you guys so much for sticking with me all this time. It still amazes me the level of interest people still have in this show after all these years. But watching episodes like this, reminds me each time what an incredible show it is and how lucky I am to be sharing it with all of you guys. So I cannot wait to jump into this episode. Let's get into it. This is Season 3, Episode 1, Mr. Ruggerio's Neighborhood. Now this episode opens, as we do each season, with Tony going out to his driveway to pick up the newspaper in his bathrobe. But this episode actually takes an interesting turn in that it's not actually focused on Tony and the mob crew so much as it is focused on the FBI. This is kind of their episode where we get to see things from their perspective. They're conducting this investigation against Tony, and we see all the things they have to go through in order to investigate him. The first thing they're trying to do is plant a bug in Tony's house. Tony conducts meetings there occasionally with other mobsters, and they want to place a wire in there. So they get a court order allowing them to do so, but in order to logistically put the bug in there, they have to know everyone's schedule and when they'll be out of the house. They need some time to not only be able to figure out where to plant this bug, but actually create it and then go back in and plant the bug in the optimal place to record audio. It's actually really funny that they have these nicknames for when they're, in the shadows watching the family. AJ is Baby Bing, Meadow is Princess Bing, Carmela is Mrs. Bing, and Tony is Papa Bing or Der Bingle. And they refer to the house as the sausage factory. So they have these code names, which is really, really funny. There's a great song that's playing while they're conducting their investigation. It's a mashup of the Peter Gunn theme as well as Every Breath You Take by the Police, which it's a song that kind of sounds romantic, but if you listen to the lyrics, it's actually about stalking. So it's incredible that they mash those two things together. It sounds like, on the one hand, a police, investigation, and it also, sounds like they're kind of stalking the family, which they are. But Tony and his crew are having lunch at the pork store. We are introduced to Patsy, who is the twin brother of Spoons, who they killed last season. Dan Grimaldi played Spoons. They killed him off, but then they decided they still wanted him around. So they wrote in this character of him having a twin, which is a little far-fetched, but it allows them to kind of keep the actor around. And so Patsy is really depressed because it's their birthday and, his twin brother's now dead. Tony can't stand to see people sad. He can't stand them to have emotional problems because all he cares about is his own, personal problems. So when Patsy's kind of complaining and being down, Tony just doesn't want to deal with it at all. He's just like, what are you going to do? Perk up. Come on, stop being such a downer. Even though he's the one who had his brother murdered. Just an incredible level of selfishness. Also, Carmela is taking tennis lessons. She's disappointed when she goes there and learns that her male tennis instructor is leaving. We can tell it's implied that she was kind of going to just get some male attention. What Carmela does. It's the same thing like it was with Vic Musto. She just wants to kind of flirt and be around men since Tony's always screwing around. And it's really funny because the new instructor, not only is she a woman, but it's kind of implied that she's a lesbian and she's really attracted to Adriana, who Carmela brought with her. She's touching her all over and hugging her and being really nice to her. And meanwhile, she's treating Carmela like shit. She doesn't want anything to do with Carmela. And Carmela's just getting so frustrated, not having that positive attention she was getting. Meanwhile, the FBI guys who are assigned to watch them are just having the time of their lives, checking out these scantily clad women. Pretty good job. It could be much worse. Meadow is in college at Columbia, so she started, she's moved into the dorms there and she started going to classes. We're introduced to her new roommate, Caitlin Rucker, and let me just say, thank God for Caitlin Rucker. I'm about to get 30,000 views on this video just because of this screenshot that I'm using. But yeah, she is her new roommate, and she's kind of a little wild, kind of manic, up and down, bipolar, which we'll see play out this season. But we're kind of introduced to Meadow's life in college now that she's taken a step away from New Jersey. The FBI go into the house when no one's there and figure out where to plant the bug. They're going to plant it in the basement where Tony has his meetings. However, before they're able to go back in and actually plant the device that they made, Tony's water heater breaks. It's funny, they actually noticed that the water heater was going to break when they were there, and they were laughing about, the damage it's going to do to the house. But funny enough, it ended up stopping them from being able to go back to the house because now the house is flooded and they have to wait for it to get repaired and all that to get taken care of before they can go back in. I really like the FBI scenes and the fact that we get to see things from their perspective this episode. We get the sense that this is not an all-powerful organization. It's made up of a bunch of guys who are kind of struggling to get the job done. They have a personal life. They have inner office conflicts, and it really humanizes the enemies of the series, the FBI. So it's really cool that we got to see things from their perspective. Meanwhile, Patsy is drunk and angry at Tony. He knows that Tony is the one who killed his brother. He shows up to Tony's house drunk out of his mind and points a gun at him through the window. But instead of shooting him, he kind of chickens out and instead takes a piss in Tony's pool, which is pretty funny. Later, Tony confronts him about his negative attitude and basically tells him that, if you want to be with us, if you want to make some money with us, forget about your brother, stop complaining, stop being depressed, because he's tired of hearing it. And Patsy reluctantly agrees to, forget about his brother and just move on with Tony's crew now, which will work out pretty good for him. He's going to become a pretty critical member of Tony's crew in later seasons, but that's coming down the line. The FBI are finally able to successfully plant the bug in the house. They hear a conversation, but it's actually Tony just talking with Stasio, I think his name is. He's the husband of their maid, Liliana. And he's actually played by a different actor than we saw in season 2. And the whole time I'm watching this guy, I'm wondering, where the hell's the jacket? Tony gave him Richie's jacket. Does this guy even realize how important that jacket is? Rocco DeMeo was the toughest guy in Essex County, but he didn't come back around after Richie was done with him. Just imagine the disrespect on this guy not wearing that jacket after everything that Richie went through. But Stasio is complaining about the fact that he, in Poland, was an engineer with a grant from the state, and now he's basically a cab driver and forced to do these menial jobs for Tony. Meanwhile, Tony and Carmela are having a separate conversation. They're not thinking at all about this guy. It just goes to show you how self-absorbed they are. And it's a really funny ending. But that is the first episode of Season 3. A very different episode than we're used to, but a really good one. So thank you guys for watching this, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog, coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog. Today we're looking at the second episode of the third season, Proshai, Livushka. Apologies to my Russian friend if I didn't get that right, but a lot going on in this episode. And we open up with Tony passed out on the floor. We have this rewind sequence where we go back in time and see what Tony was doing before he passed out. He goes downstairs at his home and sees Meadow watching The Public Enemy, which is his favorite film, and also it's David Chase's favorite film. He has a lot of references to it throughout the series. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about that movie, I actually did a review, which I'll link in the description. Tony sees that Meadow is actually down there with a friend from school. It's a black kid. His name is Noah. Noah is from Los Angeles. He's got family in Hollywood. And when Meadow's not in the room, Tony kind of talks with him and tells him basically to stay away from his daughter. He doesn't want his daughter with a black guy. And, he's obviously really offended by that. And later on, when Meadow learns about what Tony said to him, she is pissed off, throughout the episode. And we're going to see that play out throughout this season. But after this confrontation with Noah, Tony passes out while he's eating some gabagool. Tony goes to see Livia at her house. He's being nice to her, presumably because he's worried that she might testify against him because she was arrested for using stolen airline tickets. And the FBI know it was Tony who got it for her. So they're hoping that Livia will testify against him. Now, the actress Nancy Marchand, who plays Livia, actually passed away before season 3 was started. So even though we see her in this episode, it's actually CGI. According to Wikipedia, the CGI cost around $250,000. And I'll have to say that that was a waste of money because this is really, really bad CGI. It's one of the worst moments, I think, in The Sopranos. The biggest mistake, at least. You know, they're using old lines of dialogue from season 1 and 2, and it's just awkward to see Tony trying to interact with this CGI figure. It just doesn't look good at all. Really, they're not even having like a good character moment or anything. It's not like a good send-off for her. They're literally just talking about this plot line, which they're not even going to follow through with. The original plot line for season 3 was going to involve a trial with Tony and whether or not Livia was going to testify against him. But due to her unfortunate death, they had to drop that storyline. It's really sad that she's not a part of the series anymore. She was absolutely great for the first 2 seasons. But we'll see in this season and onward where the series goes now that it's not really tied to the mother and son conflict that we started out with. But Tony goes back home. He's outside taking care of his tomatoes, which I think is kind of a reference to Godfather when, Vito dies in the tomato garden. We'll see another Godfather reference coming up here. But after he comes back in from that, he learns that Livia has passed away in her sleep. So he's not really sure how to feel about this. They go over to the house. They meet with Svetlana, who is his mistress Irina's cousin, who was taking care of Livia this whole time. They drink some vodka with her, and she utters the title of this episode, which means goodbye, little Livia. The next day, people come over to the house to give their condolences. But we're actually introduced to Ralph Cifaretto. Ralph is one of the members of his crew. He's been off in Miami this whole time, and we're introduced to him in this episode. It seems that Tony really doesn't like Ralph straight from the get-go. We'll learn more about that why, but basically Ralph is a piece of shit, but a really funny one. And we're introduced to this conflict. There's a garbage dispute going on. They've been burning trucks and setting dumpsters on fire. Tony tells him to basically knock it off. He doesn't like all this negative attention. So later on, we see Ralph beating up the guy in charge of the garbage contract because he's not allowed to set fires anymore, but he's still going to be making moves to make sure that he comes out on top. Really interesting character, and I can't wait to explore him more this season. But Tony basically tells Janice to come back from Seattle or wherever she was. She left at the end of last season because of her killing Richie, and she's been basically hiding this whole time. But Tony wants her to come back to basically be with the family in this sad moment. They go to Cozzarelli's funeral home, and this is the other reference to Godfather. When they go down the elevator, it looks just like when they go down to see the coroner in or the Undertaker in Godfather, and he has some lines like "I'll use all my powers," which is what Vito Corleone asked the Undertaker to do in Godfather Part 1. But Livia actually did not want a service. She didn't want any kind of ceremony at all. But Janice kind of guilts the 2 other siblings into doing one anyway. It's funny, she mentions that Livia used to dream about her funeral, which is just a really funny line. It's, normal people dream about like their wedding or something like that, but Livia was just such a dark, depressed person that she used to dream about her funeral. Just a great line of dialogue there. But they decide to have one, even though Livia didn't want it. Tony goes to talk to Melfi about his mother. He's having a real hard time, expressing himself. On the one hand, he is really glad that she's dead. She was just a horrible person. A lot of stress in his life was because of her. And he's now doesn't have to worry about the fact that she might have testified against him. But on the other hand, he's feeling guilty about, basically hating his mother. And he really just can't even accept that she'd wanted him dead this whole time. He still doesn't even blame her for the hit. He tries to excuse her for that. So Tony's really conflicted about how he feels. We also see that Ray Curto is a rat. I mentioned before that all of Tony's capos from the first season were rats. At least I think they were. But Ray Curto is definitely a rat. He's been working with the FBI. He's a very willing cooperator. He even asks if he can wear a wire. And it's funny that he'll never get caught for that. But we'll see more of that coming up. Janice is at the house. She's looking for money. She thinks Livia has money buried somewhere in the walls. Tony comes down and Janice reveals that Livia kept only Tony's things from his childhood. She didn't keep anything of Janice or Barbara's. She had a few things of Barbara's, but nothing from Janice. She really hated Janice, just like everyone else. But she kept all of Tony's things, which is it's a really interesting idea that, you know, even though she did all these horrible things to her son, in many ways, I think he was her favorite child. It's a really fucked up relationship, but that's an interesting detail. The crew is complaining about having to go to Livia's funeral. They don't really want to go, but they have to because Tony's the boss. It's funny, Chris, Furio, and Adriana are getting high before the service, and it's clear that these guys don't smoke weed because, or the actors didn't smoke weed or anything because they are not clearing that bong and just not having good weed etiquette at all. But at the funeral service, we're introduced to Assemblyman Zellman, who's going to play a part in these next few seasons. We also see the Reverend that Tony was running that scheme with, and they talked about, you know, parents passing away. That was one of the things that they were discussing, and they bring him back for this moment. At the burial site, Janice gets into a confrontation with Svetlana. She wants Svetlana out of the house, even though Tony said that she could live there for a while. And she wants this record collection that Livia gave her because it's worth money. Janice pretends that she wants it to connect with her mother, but she really just wants to sell it. And it's setting up a conflict between the two that's going to play out this season, which is really funny. Afterwards, they have a wake at the house. There's an interesting moment where Tony sees Pussy in the mirror. It's a really weird supernatural moment. There's another one similar earlier in the episode when AJ's doing his homework and he hears what he thinks is Livia in the house. There's like a creaking noise. So there's definitely some supernatural moments throughout The Sopranos like this. But Janice makes things awkward. She makes everyone come into the room and she wants them all to talk about Livia. She's really doing it to put herself at the center of things. She just wants the attention. She's such a hateable but incredibly written character. No one has anything really nice to say about Livia. They're struggling and they're kind of giving generic, like, she said what was on her mind kind of things. The only one who has something nice to say is Livia's best friend, who she ran over in the first season. She's the one she hit with her car. But even still, she really liked Livia. And she has this great little detail, which was that anytime someone was in the hospital or someone died, Livia would call this friend and let her know, which again just goes to show you how obsessed with, you know, dark, depressing things Livia was. So great little detail there. Chris is trying to say something, but he's so high and so fucked up that it's just complete nonsense. It's a really funny line of dialogue he has, and they'll reference this later at his intervention. Meanwhile, though, Carmela has had enough of all this bullshit. She's been drinking, and she finally says what everyone's thinking, which is that, you know, Livia was a horrible person, and they're basically all bullshitting right now, trying to say nice things about her. No one liked her. Her father finally steps up and, you know, is like, this woman was horrible and kept us away from our daughter all this time. And so the dam kind of bursts, and, you know, people are ready to realize that, like, Livia was not a good person and not deserving of any of this kind of praise. At the end of the episode, we see Tony watching The Public Enemy. He's been watching it throughout the episode and looking at certain scenes. And we see him crying at the end when the mother of Tom Powers, who's the main character of that movie, is kind of comforting her son, and then he dies at the end. So it's obviously the movie's got him thinking about his relationship with his own mother. There's a lot of similarities between Public Enemy and Sopranos. Check out my review if you're interested. But yeah, this is the episode. I was really, really sad to see Nancy Marchand go. But still, besides that CGI fiasco, it is a pretty good send-off to her. And it'll be interesting to see where the series goes from here. So thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log. Today we're looking at the third episode of the third season, Fortunate Son. Now, if I sound a little different in this episode, it's because my stupid Blue Yeti microphone ended up failing on me. I had to go to the store and get a new microphone. I'm still working on the settings on this one, making sure it sounds good. But let's be honest here, my voice never sounded good to begin with, so we might as well just jump into the episode. In this episode, Christopher is finally made. He becomes a made man. If you ask me, it's been a long time coming. After what he did on the Triborough Tower situation alone, he should have been made then and there. But irregardless, Christopher and Eugene go to their making ceremony. It's held in this basement, and there's definitely a lack of formality in this ceremony, especially compared to other scenes I've seen in other movies and TV shows where guys get made. I'm comparing it to something like Boardwalk Empire, where there was just a lot more sense of like grandiose to the whole thing. It kind of seems like Tony's just winging it off the top of his head, which sounds like a Jersey thing to do. I mean, Phil was complaining about this for a reason. And there is no sword and gun on the table, although they do get their fingers pricked, so he was wrong about that. But Christopher sees a bird in the window, either a raven or a crow, I'm not sure. But he takes it as a bad omen, and it seems like it is, because things definitely don't go his way in this episode. But after the ceremony, they have this party. Christopher gets the sports book, which is a gambling operation, from Paulie. Paulie gives it to him, and it's kind of meant to be like a gift, or at least that's how Paulie's presenting it. But he has a $6,000 a week minimum that Christopher has to pay, which we'll see him have a little bit of trouble in this episode with. Meanwhile, Tony's at the party. He's talking with Carmine Sr. This is where we get the first mention of the Esplanade, their big construction project that they're going to make a lot of money on because they control the union of the construction workers. And Carmine Sr. also mentions that he knows about Tony's spells, as he calls it, his panic attacks, and he knows that Tony's seeing a psychiatrist. And even though he's playing it kind of nice, he's like, don't worry, there's nothing embarrassing about it. I think he's kind of hinting at him that, hey, I know everything that goes on here. Never forget that I have eyes and ears everywhere. So it's kind of like an alpha move there on Carmine's part. And it rattles Tony a little bit because later on at the therapy, he tells Melfi that he wants to start seeing results, or else he's not going to keep doing this because he knows it makes him look weak to the other mobsters. So Melfi wants to get serious too and really focus on him getting better. But funny enough, Tony's actually the one who's, holding things back. He's really distracted. He takes a call about some gambling things in the middle of their session. So, even though he wants results, he's not really willing to work hard for them. Christopher makes a mistake at the sports book, and they end up losing some money. He doesn't have the full 6 figures that he owes Paulie, and Paulie punishes him by charging him another $2,000 to make up for things. So we can see that, despite his kind of generous statements at the beginning of the episode, this is really just a money-making scheme for Paulie, and he's only looking out for himself. So we cut to Sunday dinner at the Soprano house. We learned that Ralph is actually dating Rosalie April, so he's kind of integrated himself with that family. Jackie Jr. is running late. He was supposed to be there. And I noticed a very interesting detail, which is that Rosalie defends Jackie when Ralphie is complaining about him, but when she gets Jackie Jr. on the phone, she's, telling him he needs to get his ass over there. That's kind of like that mob idea where you never go outside the family, you never, show any kind of disloyalty to your family to outsiders. And even though Ralph is dating her, he's still kind of an outsider right now. So I'm willing to bet she learned that kind of mentality from being married to Jackie Sr. But Jackie Jr. does not show up. He's really rude, disrespectful. And so Tony sits him down for a meeting at Vesuvio's. Now, Jackie thinks that Tony had his Uncle Richie killed. And Tony didn't have Richie killed, but he knew about it and covered it up. But even still, Tony lies and says that he didn't kill Richie and that Richie actually went into the witness protection program, which somehow Jackie believes, even though Richie was, spent 10 years in jail without saying a word. And to think he would get out and then become a rat. It's just, so unrealistic. But this idiot kid just believes it. And Tony even has this funny line where he says, you'd be a shithead to believe me, but I didn't do it. And then Jackie ends up believing him, thereby confirming that he is a shithead. Just a really funny bit of dialogue there. But Tony tells Jackie that his father never wanted him to be in the life and that he should stay in school. Although Jackie's really struggling in school, he doesn't have the brains for, becoming a doctor and going through medical school. So he's left kind of wondering what he should do. Chris needs money to pay back Paulie for the money he messed up at the sports book. Jackie Jr. and his friend Dino tell him about this idea they have to steal money from a charity event at Jackie's school. So Chris does that to get some money to pay back Paulie. Jackie Jr. is the driver. He ends up pissing himself, as they're driving away, but even still, they get away with the money. Christopher pays off Paulie, but Tony's pissed off because he does not want Jackie Jr. involved in the life, and he specifically told Christopher this earlier. Meanwhile, Janice is living at Livia's house with Svetlana, so they're kind of sharing the place for the time being until Svetlana can move out. Janice wants the records back that Livia gave to Svetlana, and Svetlana refuses. So in the middle of the night, Janice steals Svetlana's prosthetic leg, and it's a very expensive leg because it was made here in America, and she wants it back, of course. She calls Tony to try and get him to help. He shows up at the house, and Irina is there. She kind of arranged this. Irina wanted to talk to Tony again and see him, but he kind of refuses to engage with her. He says he'll help Svetlana get back the leg, and then he goes to the fridge to see if there's anything to eat. He sees some gabagool there, and it reminds him of when he was a child. So when he was a young, child, he saw his father chop off Mr. Satriali's finger, the owner of Satriali's pork store, over a gambling debt. And this event didn't really traumatize Tony, but it kind of made him realize how his father operates, how they get all this free stuff that they get. And it really freaked him out when he saw how much his mom was turned on by getting free meat from his father. And he ends up having his first panic attack in that moment as a child. So in therapy, they discover this link between meat and his panic attacks because it reminds him of all the violence his family is involved in. Meanwhile, Meadow is mad at Tony after the racist things he said to her friend Noah. She keeps seeing Noah, kind of to spite her father because she just does not like his racist attitude. It's a little bit of a cringy storyline, to be honest, but funny little detail here. Noah says that Tony's lucky he didn't punch his lights out. And that's actually foreshadowing to the final episode of the series. You'll remember that it cuts to black at the very last scene. Well, what most people don't know is that was actually Noah. He showed up to that restaurant and punched Tony's lights out, and that's why it cuts to black. True story. But the last kind of story beat happening in this episode is AJ joining the football team. It's funny, he joined kind of because he just wanted the uniform. We learned about that in the first episode this season. But irregardless, Tony is finally proud of his son. AJ's doing pretty good with the football. And they're actually connecting and bonding for once, instead of AJ just goofing around doing nothing. But AJ is under a lot of stress. When he goes to visit Meadow at her college, he sees all the college kids, and it just kind of overwhelms him that people expect him to, be like Meadow and go to college and be like all these students. And there's even more pressure when he's offered the position of team captain, and all this stress finally gets to him, and he ends up collapsing. He has a panic attack just like Tony. So we're getting the idea that this condition is inherited not just from Tony's father to him, but also down to AJ too. And we're going to explore that throughout the rest of this series. But that is this episode. Stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log. Today we're looking at the 4th episode of the 3rd season, Employee of the Month. Now this is a very heavy episode, some very serious subject matter going on here. But before we get into the meat of the episode, I just want to talk about the other storylines and just knock those out real quick. So Ralph is trying to bond with Jackie. He's of course dating Jackie's mother, Rosalie, and Jackie Jr. is just not happy with that. He doesn't like Ralph. Ralph tries bonding with him. It doesn't really work. So instead, Ralph takes Jackie along to make a collection. Ralph ends up starting a fight with this guy, basically kind of to impress Jackie and just show him that he's a tough guy, a real gangster. And they get into a fight, and he has Jackie Jr. help him beat the guy up. And they end up robbing him. And it just kind of ingrains him to Ralphie and makes him see that since Jackie wants to be a gangster, Ralph can maybe help him with this, and Ralph has some serious connections. So this doesn't sit well with Tony. Tony does not want Jackie Jr. involved in the life at all. And so this is one of the things that leads him to pass over Ralphie and instead make Gigi the new captain of the April crew. And this really disappoints Ralphie because he's the best earner in the family. He's making a lot of money for Tony, but Tony just really doesn't trust him with all this crazy behavior of his. And we're going to see more of that this season. The second thing going on is that Johnny Sack moves to New Jersey. He buys this really big mansion, a lot of land, and Tony is worried because with Johnny so close, he's worried that John will stick his nose in Tony's business and try to manipulate affairs to the Lupertazzi family's benefits. And John assures him that it's just a place for him to live, but Tony is worried, and we're going to see that he does stick his beak in and try to, again, manipulate business to suit his ends. So that's the second thing going on this episode. The third and last thing before we get into the big stuff is Janice has Svetlana's leg. She stole it to force her to give back the records that Livia gave her. Janice says that she wants it to connect with her mother, but everyone knows she just wants to sell the records because they're worth a lot of money. She refuses to give it back, so Svetlana sends some Russian goons to go get it back for her. When she backtalks them, they end up beating her up and even breaking a few ribs. And finally, she gives back the leg to them. And in the hospital, she just realizes that she's hit rock bottom. She stole a woman's leg. She realizes just how pathetic she's been, and she decides that she's going to become a born-again Christian. And Tony's kind of fed up with this because this is her typical thing. That was the whole thing with her being a Hindu before, and she's always kind of searching for an identity. And it's always costing Tony time and resources because now he has to go avenge Janice, or else he'll look weak if he allows his sister to get beat up by these guys. So he's just really annoyed with Janice and all the problems that she puts him through. But Janice decides that this is her opportunity to try to become a better person. And we'll see how that plays out this season, but I have my doubts. Now, the main thing happening in this episode revolves around Melfi. Melfi has gotten back together with her ex-husband, the guy who is part of the anti-Italian defamation league. He wants her to get rid of Tony as a patient. He does not like Tony because he hates gangsters and he hates the negative stereotype that they bring on all Italians. And Melfi realizes in her session with Tony that he's really not taking these things seriously. Even though he says he wants to get better and not have these panic attacks anymore, he's not devoted to it. He doesn't really care about getting better. So she actually decides that it might be time for him to move on and see someone else. She recommends that he goes and sees a behavioral therapist, someone who will more directly help him with his panic attacks. But Tony doesn't like the idea. He wants to stick with Melfi because he likes their relationship so far. While Melfi is leaving work late at night, she's attacked and actually ends up being raped in the stairwell of her building. It's actually an incredibly brutal scene and really hard to watch. She goes to the hospital and talks to the police. They catch the guy, but unfortunately, due to some sort of legal fiasco, they mishandled the evidence kit or something like that. They have to let him go, and he basically faces no repercussions for raping Melfi. And this really infuriates her. She feels victimized again, like there's no sense of justice, and she feels powerless about the whole process. She has a dream involving her getting stuck and this guy coming after her again, but before he can, he's attacked by a Rottweiler dog, and the dog just tears him to pieces. And she realizes that the dog represents Tony. She can, of course, tell Tony about what happened, and knowing him, he would have this guy killed and torn to pieces, and she would get the justice that she wants. She realizes, of course, though, that she can't do that. It's illegal, but even beyond that, it's not right for her to go and get justice in her own hands. She's supposed to leave it to the cops as a good, upstanding citizen. At therapy, though, when she's talking to Tony, Tony says that he's open to going to see another psychiatrist. He's thought about it, and he's willing to go see someone else. But she actually turns him down. She wants him to stay now. And we can see that Melfi feels a little bit safe with Tony. He is a protective figure for her. We've kind of played around with that idea that she, is vicariously living through his mob activities. And in this case, it really benefits her because she feels safe and powerful now having him as a, potential ally. However, she starts crying in the middle of their session. Tony goes to comfort her. It's funny, you can see him kind of hesitate for a minute because he doesn't really understand what's happening. He thinks he did something wrong. He's asking what did I do? What did I do? But she tells him to go sit back down. And it's actually an interesting callback because remember in the dream, she was thinking about Tony as the Rottweiler dog. And when she tells him to sit, again, it's like she's talking to a dog. That's kind of how she sees him right now. And he asks her if there's anything she wants to tell him. And we can see her debating in her head, should she tell Tony or not? And in the end, she says no, and the episode ends. And a lot of people were very disappointed that she didn't tell Tony. They really wanted to see Tony have this guy killed. But I think it's a very powerful ending. It's a very powerful moment in the series where she chose her integrity. She chose her, ethics over, making herself feel better by getting revenge. And of course, if she had told Tony and he did something about this, it would have ruined their relationship. She would not have been able to treat him after that anymore. She would have been compromised. So I think it's really powerful. It speaks volumes about her character. Definitely not satisfying to the people who wanted this guy just torn to pieces, but I think a realistic and really well-written ending. So very powerful episode. A lot of horrific things happen. But that is the episode, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog, where hopefully things will be a little bit more lighthearted than they were this time. Thanks, and stay tuned for that soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog. Today we're looking at the 5th episode of the 3rd season, Another Toothpick. Now, this episode opens up with Tony and Carmela at a group therapy session with Melfi. They brought her in to talk about Tony's panic attacks, but the therapy doesn't go well. She feels like she's there to be a scapegoat for Tony to blame all his problems on, and it just ends up with them getting into a fight. Later on, as they're driving home, Tony gets pulled over by a traffic cop, and he gives the cop a lot of attitude. This is classic Tony. He has a problem with authority. He can't just accept the parking ticket, which, logically, he should just take it and pay it. It's not a big deal. But he can't help but give this cop lip and try to get out of it. And the cop ends up writing him up. Later on, Vito's brother Brian is attacked by this guy, Mustang Sally. Mustang Sally's girlfriend was talking to him. He got jealous, and then he ended up hitting Brian with a golf club and ends up putting him in a coma, and he might end up even a vegetable. The guys have a meeting and they decide it's time to whack Mustang Sally. He's a troubled kid. He's been getting into a lot of fights with people. He's a whack job, and they decide this is the last straw and they're going to get rid of him. Later on, they're at a funeral for Carmela's uncle Febby, who died of cancer. At the funeral, Tony sees Bobby Sr., Bobby Bacala's dad. He's an old man who's been in the life for a long time, a real tough guy, a reputation as like this ruthless killer. And Tony talks to him about Mustang Sally because Mustang Sally is his godson. Bobby Sr., though, doesn't care about him. He just stood up as a favor for his old man, and he's fine with Tony having him whacked. However, Tony learns that Bobby Sr. is dying of lung cancer. He's coughing all the time. He's very weak. Janice ends up saying the line of the title, which is, he'll be another toothpick. And this really upsets Junior to hear, a sick old man talked about like this. Later on, though, Bobby tells Junior that Tony is having Bobby Sr. do the hit on Mustang Sally. The plan is that he'll be able to get in close to Mustang Sally because he's his godfather, and they're going to do the hit that way. Now, Bobby's obviously worried about his father because he's incredibly weak, and he's worried that he'll get killed doing this. Junior agrees to talk to Tony and try to convince him not to do the hit. But Tony refuses to listen. He doesn't want to go against Gigi. He doesn't want to undermine him to that crew, especially with Ralphie kind of undermining him already. And so he refuses to change his mind. Meanwhile, Adriana quits her job at Vesuvio. She's been working as the hostess for a while, but now that Christopher is a maid guy, he doesn't want her working anymore, so she leaves her job there. This upsets Artie. At dinner, he gets into a drunken argument with Christopher. It ends up getting physical, and Tony has to break the two of them up. Artie tells Tony that he's in love with Adriana. This is classic Artie. He's going through a midlife crisis, and there's this young, beautiful woman around him. And he falls in love with her. Tony tells him never to say that again because it's just going to cause trouble. But he does treat Artie very gently. Anyone else who had done this, Tony would have kicked their ass. But again, he loves Artie so much that he'll just kind of handhold him through this and not really take it out on him. Later, Tony calls Zellman. It's funny, he actually uses the name Spears, which that's the name he gave the psychiatrist when he was trying to do therapy with someone when Melfi wouldn't see him. So it's funny they brought that name back. But he is obsessed with this parking ticket. He wants Zellman to get it squashed. He doesn't want to talk about the Esplanade or any of their actual business. But he just can't stand that this cop gave him a ticket. He wants it taken care of. Later on, Junior lies to Bobby. He says that he never talked to Tony. He doesn't want to look weak. He doesn't want to admit that Tony refused to listen to him because Junior is supposed to be the boss of the family still, but he actually doesn't have any power. So he doesn't want to look weak in front of Bobby. But when Bobby Sr. shows up, he sees just how weak the old man is. He's coughing everywhere, coughing up blood, and Junior just realizes he can't do this hit. He might get killed by Mustang Sally. But Bobby Sr. doesn't care. He just wants to be useful for once. And as he sees it, he's dead anyway, so what does it even matter? Junior eventually talks to Johnny Sack and gets him to go try to convince Tony. They talk about this at dinner. And even though Johnny Sack promised Tony he wasn't going to butt in on his business when he moved to New Jersey, we can clearly see that that's what he's doing here. He's getting in Tony's business and making it harder for him. But again, Tony refuses to listen. And of course, Ralphie keeps undermining Gigi, making jokes, and just making him look bad. Later on, Tony sees the cop who gave him a ticket working at this fountain store. Zellman got the cop transferred out of traffic, and now he's has a desk job as a cop, but he's not eligible for overtime anymore. So he has to work this second job just to make ends meet. And Tony feels kind of guilty about this. He talks to Zellman about maybe getting him back, but Zellman tells him that nobody likes him. He's not a likable guy for the other cops, and that he's actually depressed, which I think makes Tony sympathize with him a little bit more because obviously Tony's the same way. He's depressed as well. Bobby Sr. goes to see Mustang Sally. He goes as under the guise of being a friend and tells Mustang Sally that he got him a pass. When Mustang Sally's getting him a drink of water, Bacala sneaks up behind him with a gun, but Sally's roommate sees him and alerts him, so it ends up in a struggle. They're both fighting for their lives, but old man Bacala manages to shoot him in the head. He's pretty happy about this. Again, he feels like a man again for once, but as he's driving home, he passes out and ends up crashing the car and dying. And this really, really upsets Junior. He wants to know if the cancer killed him or the car ride did, but he's all torn up by this. Tony, meanwhile, wants to start a line of salad dressing with Artie. At the Esplanade, they're opening up these factories, and he wants to use Artie's recipe to mass produce these salad dressings. Funny enough, it's under the name Satriali's, not Vesuvio, because apparently in marketing, names that start with V remind people of vaginas. I didn't know that, but Charmaine refuses to allow this to happen. She doesn't want any business with Tony at all, just like she always does not want to be associated with the mob. They get into a fight about this, and it eventually leads to Charmaine saying she's going to divorce Artie. This marriage has been troubled for a while, and this is the last straw. Tony goes to meet with Junior at the doctor's office. Junior reveals that he has cancer, stomach cancer. That's why he didn't want Bobby Sr. to do the hit, because in his mind, cancer comes in threes. There was Jackie Sr. who died of cancer, and then Carmela's uncle Febby, and he was thinking that if old man Bacala died of cancer, he would be spared. So that's why he was so upset that the guy died, not from cancer, but from the car crashing. Tony says that he's not going to tell anyone, but the first call he makes is to Janice immediately afterwards. And they end up talking about all the old timers who are now gone. Meadow comes back to the house to do some laundry. She tells them that her bike was stolen by a black guy, and Tony just can't let this go. They've been fighting for a long time about, her associating with black people. And again, he's just making it so much worse by being so combative with her. But funny enough, when she storms off, she takes the lamp with the wire in it back to her dorm. So essentially, the FBI are now left with no wire in the house, which is funny that she ended up saving Tony's ass by removing the wire from the basement. Artie goes to dinner with Adriana. He's still in love with her, and he's trying to, now that he's divorcing Charmaine, he's trying to maybe weasel his way in with her, which is just never going to happen. And it's so cringe that he doesn't realize that. I mean, Artie is so beta, it hurts to watch. He makes it awkward, and, she gets up and leaves. And it's just incredible how pathetic Artie can be sometimes. Later on, Tony meets with Zellman and Johnny Sack to discuss the Esplanade. Zellman tells Tony that he can get the cop reassigned to his old job again if he wants. Tony decides that he doesn't care anymore. The cop got what was coming to him. But we can tell he still feels guilty. So later on, he tries to, give the cop a big tip at the fountain store. But he refuses. He knows that Tony is the one who got him stuck there. And he refuses to take his money and make him feel better. So that's where the episode ends. I hope you guys enjoyed this Soprano log, and stay tuned for the next one, coming soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log, and today we're looking at the 6th episode of the 3rd season, University. Now, this is one of the most important and best written episodes of the entire series. I feel like Terry Winter always knocks it out of the park when he writes the script, and it's incredible the way it compares and contrasts two different characters and the themes that it explores about our society and growing up today. So let's get into the episode. There's two distinct storylines happening. The first is with Meadow and Noah. They're continuing to date. They're hanging out in her dorm room when they're interrupted by Meadow's roommate, Caitlin. As we saw before, Caitlin is struggling being in New York. She's a country girl. She's not used to this big city life. And the disturbing things that she's seeing are really kind of driving her crazy. They're sympathetic, but they end up leaving to go to Noah's dorm room to get away from her. And there they end up having sex. So Meadow loses her virginity to Noah. And it seems like they're really falling in love. They decide to help Caitlin out. They take her out for her birthday, try to cheer her up. And it seems to be working until she sees a homeless woman with some newspaper in her ass. I gotta admit, that's pretty disturbing, and it really freaks out Caitlin, and she becomes incredibly clingy to Meadow. She's always wondering where Meadow is, which drives Meadow crazy. She goes back to New Jersey to get away from her for a little while, and when she's gone, Caitlin goes to hang out with Noah instead. She just needs to kind of be around people. This causes Noah to get a C on a paper that he was working on, and this really upsets him. He wants to get all A's. There's high expectations for him, and he's really pissed off that, he got this one C, even though it's not really a big deal. But we're kind of seeing another side to his personality with this. Meadow later meets with his father. He's a entertainment attorney. It's funny, he actually mentions that he sat on the plane with Tim Daly, and he'll, of course, be on the show later as JT Dolan. But they meet, and Meadow gets a sense for where Noah comes from and, his kind of lifestyle. Later on, Noah tells her that his father took out a restraining order on Caitlin because he doesn't want her disturbing his son and affecting his grades. And even later than that, he breaks up with Meadow in the library. He says it's because she's incredibly negative and he just can't stand to be around her anymore. I've heard a lot of debate on this. Some people think that maybe he slept with Caitlin when she came to his dorm room. She did seem to be different when she came back from that. And other people are thinking maybe the dad made him break up with her because he realized that she's the daughter of a mobster. But I'm not sure which of those I believe. But in either way, Meadow has had her first taste of, rejection, and things were not as she first thought they were, especially with Noah. He turns out to be a very different person than she first thought. The second storyline going on in this episode is with a stripper named Tracy. She works at the Bada Bing. She tries approaching Tony and giving him some bread that she baked. Tony doesn't really want to associate with her. He says that they have an employee-employer relationship, and, he's not going to be a friend for her. He does give her some advice, though, which is she is dating Ralph, and she's actually pregnant with his kid, maybe, so to speak, but he advises her to get an abortion because Ralph is just a terrible person, and he would make an absolutely terrible father. We get to see more of Tracy's life. She has a very hard life. She has one kid already. She's working as a stripper, and again, she's in an abusive relationship with Ralph. He, takes advantage of her. And, Ralph in this episode has these very manic episodes. He's on cocaine. He ends up hitting Georgie in the eye with a chain because of his gladiator fixation, which on the one hand is really funny, but it's also incredibly disturbing how deranged he can be at times. Tracy later misses work for 3 days straight because she's hanging out with Ralph. It's funny, Ralph does not have an appreciation for classic films, as if I had another reason to hate him. But he does not like the Spartacus movie with Kirk Douglas. Silvio shows up at the house and drags Tracy back to work. He ends up, hitting her across the face. Meanwhile, Ralph is watching all this laughing in the window. He's just an incredible piece of shit. But again, we're seeing another side to Silvio here. Like, if you owe him money, he can be a ruthless motherfucker. So, again, we're seeing layers to Silvio. And, this is contrasted with immediately after this, we cut to them, having a nice dinner at Rosalie's house. So we're seeing the two different sides that these mobsters have. One as family men, and then two as, vicious criminals. Later on at the club, she's mad at Ralph because he hasn't called her in 3 days. She insults him in front of the guys. He goes out to the parking lot and kind of comforts her and tells her that, they're going to be together and they're going to have a happy life. But he's, messing with her, and he pulls the rug out from underneath her. And this leads to a physical confrontation where he very brutally murders her, just beats her to death. It's a very disturbing scene. And he, does not give a shit about this. It doesn't even faze him. He's like, what's the problem? When Tony sees this, it infuriates him, and he ends up beating Ralph, which is against the rules. He's not allowed to hit a made guy, even though he's the boss. So this is going to lead to a lot of problems this season, but we'll explore that more later on. But it's this black comedy where the guys are so pissed off at him for disrespecting the Bing, but they don't really give a shit about the actual girl that he ended up killing. The only one who kind of feels bad is Tony. He does feel guilty. We can see this in his session with Melfi, that this girl tried to reach out to him and he wasn't there for her, and he feels responsible. And we're going to explore where this leads to, both in this season and next season as well. But the main thing that this episode is covering is the contrast between, Meadow and Tracy. Meadow, on the one hand, this privileged girl who gets to go to college and have this great life, compared to Tracy, who has to work as a stripper. She's down on her luck, and just seeing the two different lives that they had. Again, I also think that the compare and contrast goes beyond that as well to Tony and Meadow. Both of them also had the opportunity to kind of help someone, Tony with Tracy and then Meadow with Caitlin. And in both cases, they end up, not really wanting to help that person. Their compassion is tested in this episode. And it's interesting to see that Meadow and Tony, despite all their differences of opinion, are very similar. And we're seeing the connection between the two of them in this episode. So that is University, one of the best written episodes of the entire series. Definitely one of the most memorable, if a little bit disturbing. So thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog, and today we're looking at the 7th episode of the 3rd season, Second Opinion. Now, a couple of characters are getting second opinions in this episode. The first is Junior. Now, Junior is suffering from cancer, as we learned a few episodes ago. He's going into surgery, and his doctor is a man named Kennedy. John Kennedy, as Junior raves about. But Kennedy is this world-class surgeon, a very cocky, confident surgeon, and he's also kind of a pompous jerk. He thinks he's just better than everyone because he has this amazing reputation as a surgeon. So he removes the tumor from Junior's stomach, but they learn that he might still have some residual cancer cells, and they wanted him to do a second operation. Tony wants Junior to have a second opinion, so he takes him to this other doctor in New York City, who instead recommends that they convene a cancer board. A bunch of doctors get together and they discuss what the best option is for the patient. Because Junior went against Kennedy decides that he doesn't want anything to do with Junior anymore. He starts ignoring him, not taking his phone calls. And this really freaks Junior out because, one, he just loves the man, and Kennedy is helping him, kind of get through this. And when he's gone, Junior starts to worry. He's also very superstitious, and he thinks that without Kennedy's support, he's going to die. So Tony and Furio go and confront Kennedy on the golf course. They, bring him a gift of a golf club, and then they start intimidating him and backing him into the water. And it's a satisfying scene to watch this pompous guy, just get intimidated by these guys. And in the end, they get him to, contact Junior. So he shows up where Junior's getting his chemotherapy and basically reassures him that he's going to be okay. And Junior's spirits are lifted by all of this. Meanwhile, Angie Bompancero bumps into Carmela at the grocery store. We can see that she actually was very much trying to get Carmela's attention, like she showed up there on purpose. And she gives her this sob story of why she needs more money. Tony is providing for her after Pussy was killed, although Tony's story is that Pussy went into the witness protection program. But Angie still wants more money, and she tells the story about her dog needing an operation. This really pisses Tony off because when he goes to confront her, he sees that she's driving a Cadillac, and he smashes the car up and warns her to never talk to his wife about money again and instead come to him. Meanwhile, Georgie brings in this toy. It's called Big Mouth Billy Bass or something like that. It's a singing fish that goes onto the wall. And when Tony sees it, it reminds him of the dream he had where Pussy was a talking fish. And this really upsets him. He ends up beating Georgie with the fish. Again, just taking out his, emotional concerns and problems on someone else. It's like kicking the dog, basically. Carmela goes to have lunch with the dean of Meadow School, Columbia. The dean wants the family to donate $50,000. He's done his research and he knows how much they can afford. But Tony refuses to pay this. He views it as extortion from the school, and they already pay a lot of money. So he refuses to pay $50,000 more. Later, Paulie makes Christopher strip when they're at the Bing. This is part of a policy they have where they can search newly made guys for wires anytime they want. And this really infuriates Christopher that he's being humiliated like this. Later, Paulie shows up at their apartment, humiliates him again in front of Adriana, and he even sniffs her panties, which just really pisses Christopher off. He complains to Tony about this, and then Paulie goes to Christopher and warns him to never go behind his back and talk to Tony about him again, which contradicts his statement at Christopher's making ceremony, where he said that he can talk to the boss about anyone. We're starting to see just how hollow those words were, and it's not what it was promised to be. It's not this tight, close family that supports each other. It's every man for himself, and we're getting the sense of that here. But funny enough, Paulie at the end pulls out a big mouth Billy Bass that he's going to bring to the club, not realizing just how much it pisses off Tony. So it's funny they bring that back again. And we'll see it one more time coming up here, but we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, Carmela goes to the therapy session with Melfi alone. Tony didn't want to go. And Carmela complains about Tony, about how moody he is, and he won't talk to her. Melfi can't really talk to Carmela about this because she's Tony's therapist, so she recommends she goes and sees another psychiatrist who is actually a teacher of hers. Carmela goes to see this guy, and funny enough, unlike Melfi, he doesn't, coddle the patient. He doesn't have any bullshit. He just straight up tells her point blank, you need to leave this man. He's a criminal. you are complicit if you continue to be with him. It's really interesting that Melfi is the complete opposite of a therapist than this guy, and he was her teacher, so she must not have listened to him really well. But it's refreshing to see a psychiatrist who actually calls the patients out on their bullshit instead of just enabling them like Melfi does. Carmela, is really shocked by this news. She debates whether she's going to leave him or not. But at the end of the episode, she tells Tony that she wants him to pay the $50,000 to the dean in order to do something nice and cheer her up. He agrees to do it, and, they go out to dinner at the end. And, the music playing is kind of a happy, upbeat note. So I think, despite how toxic their relationship is, and despite the fact that they're pretty much only together, for monetary reasons at times, they have reached this kind of synchronicity where, this toxic relationship is all they know and they're okay with it. It's the place that they feel comfortable with. So in that sense, they are a decent couple. But yeah, that is the episode's second opinions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log, and today we're looking at the 8th episode of the 3rd season, He Is Risen. Now, real quick before we get into the episode, I just want to acknowledge that I'm aware that sometimes these Soprano logs can be pretty heavy on the plot summary. I try to do analysis when I can and talk about elements I think people might not have noticed, but sometimes the episode doesn't give me a whole lot to work with. And again, these Soprano logs are meant to be recaps for people who haven't seen the series in a long time or might have forgotten what happens in each episode. But I do know that it bothers some people when it's just the plot summary, and full disclosure, I think this episode will be pretty heavy on that as well. But let's just get into things anyway. So Meadow is at a party at her college at Columbia. Jackie Jr. is there. He's selling ecstasy to the kids partying there. He gives her some for free, and then they end up making out and going back to her dorm room. But she passes out before anything can happen. So Jackie Jr. just kind of leaves her there. At the casino, Ralph is gambling there with the guys. Tony shows up, and everyone goes to greet Tony, but Ralph stays at the gambling table. Again, kind of a disrespectful thing to do when the boss shows up. When he does go talk to Tony, Tony offers him a drink, and Ralph turns it down. Again, something that's disrespectful when the boss offers you something. And we can tell there's still a lot of hurt feelings from when Tony punched him after he killed Tracy. So there's a lot of lingering resentment there. The music playing in the background is Ghost Riders in the Sky. It's this country western song made famous, at least for me, by Johnny Cash, but I think this is a different version. But it gives the whole scene kind of like a standoff western feel to it. Tony is really conflicted about how he's going to handle Ralph. On the one hand, he acknowledges that he was in the wrong to hit Ralph. He's not allowed to hit a made guy, even though he's the boss. And Ralph, what he did was absolutely despicable. But because Tracy was a whore, there wasn't like a justification. It wasn't someone connected to Tony where he had a right to retaliate. But the action still, really disgusts Tony. He hates Ralph after this. But Ralph is the biggest earner in the family. And so he really doesn't know what to do. He can't kill Ralph without sacrificing the money. But at the same time, he still really hates him. So he's unsure about how he wants to handle it. Ralph and Rosalie are supposed to come over to the Soprano house for Thanksgiving, but Tony makes Carmela lie to Rosalie and basically cancel the invite for them. She gives an excuse that her father is sick, but basically Tony just does not want them at the house anymore with all this conflict going on with Ralph. Tony goes to therapy, and he's been accidentally double booked with another patient. There's a woman there. Her name is Gloria Trillo. She's a Mercedes saleswoman, and Tony's just instantly attracted to this woman. She's beautiful, and as we'll learn later, there's kind of a sense of danger about her, a sense of craziness that Tony is attracted to. So he ends up giving her the session, and he comes back later to talk to Melfi. At his later session, he mentions The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which she brought up before. Tony actually got it, read it, and it's helped him implement some new strategies for how to deal with Ralph and his other enemies. So it's funny again that Melfi ends up inadvertently making him a better criminal through her therapy. At Thanksgiving, Tony sees Meadow, and it reminds him of what happens to Tracy. He goes and talks to her and tells her that he knows that things have been bad between the two of them, but he still really loves her, and he couldn't stand if something happened to her. And again, this is why he's so mad at Ralph, is because Tracy's killing reminds him of what could happen to his own daughter. After dinner, Jackie Jr. comes over to the house and invites Meadow to go out with him. Everyone is pretty happy about this, that a soprano and an April are getting together, except for Carmela. She's a little bit concerned. She thinks they're too young and immature to really be together. Ralph goes to Johnny Sack and complains about his treatment by Tony. Johnny Sack agrees to kind of mediate the conflict. He has an interest in making sure everything goes smoothly because they're all working together on the Esplanade. But Tony again refuses to compromise and, bump Ralph up to captain or give him any kind of reward just because he's so angry at Ralph. Johnny gets Ralph to apologize to Tony to try to smooth things over, but Tony refuses to acknowledge him, just makes him stand there and grovel and, doesn't even accept the apology at the end. So Ralph is completely infuriated and feels like he has no option but to make a move against Tony because of this treatment. Tony goes to talk to Junior about what to do, and it's great to see that, despite everything that happened, Tony still looks to Junior for advice. Even though Junior doesn't have any power anymore, he's still someone Tony can talk to, especially because he has really no one else to. Everyone else is underneath him, and he can't appear weak to them as the boss. But with Junior, he can, really be himself and, talk to him about the problems he's having. So it's good to see that relationship still intact. Meanwhile, Gigi is under a lot of stress as the captain of the April crew. He's having stomach problems and, all this stress from dealing with Ralph and everything else. And he ends up dying while he's on the can, which is a really humiliating way to go. But with no one left in charge of the April crew, Tony finally bumps Ralph up to captain, again, to kind of mediate the conflict that they've been having. But even still, he refuses to drink with Ralph and, congratulate him. This is purely a pragmatic solution. Meadow and Jackie are out at a bar. Meadow's pretty drunk. She wants to go to a concert and Jackie doesn't. So she ends up stealing his car keys and taking his car. She crashes it pretty much immediately. Jackie goes to help her and they end up going back to his place. And it's implied that they hook up. So, they're officially together now in that sense. And in the very last scene, we see Tony go to the Mercedes dealership to see Gloria Trillo. They end up taking her car out and going to his boat to hook up. So they've started a relationship as well, which we know is not going to end well, but we'll stay tuned for that in a few episodes. So thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was pretty plot heavy, not a whole lot of deep things for me to analyze here, but stay tuned for the next episode where hopefully we'll have some more of that. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog, and today we're looking at the 9th episode of the 3rd season, the Telltale Moozadell. Now this episode opens on Carmela's birthday. She comes home and Tony has a big ring to give her as a present. Her kids also give her presents, but funny enough, the presents are really more for them than her. Like AJ buys her the Matrix DVD and he doesn't even bother wrapping it. He just gives it to her in the bag. Meadow puts a little bit more thought into her gift. She gets her tickets to go to a spa in New York, but Meadow is also going and she paid for it with their credit card. So really it's a spa day for her as well. So it's funny to see how selfish the kids can be at times. But we go to a birthday party for Carmela. The family's gathered around there. It's funny, Janice has her friend Aaron there from her church group. He's telling Tony that as born-again Christians, they're not allowed to drink. And Janice agrees with him, but when she comes out of the bathroom, she's got some Coke on her nose. And so funny enough, apparently Jesus doesn't want people drinking, but cocaine is perfectly fine. Carmela is concerned that Meadow has begun dating Jackie April. Even though he's been acting really respectfully, coming around the house, helping out, talking with AJ, she's still concerned that he's going to distract her from everything she should be doing in New York, learning, becoming more cultural. I think subconsciously, or maybe consciously, Carmela does not want Meadow to end up like her, married to, one of these Italian wise guy types. And she wants Meadow to kind of escape the cycle of the life in New Jersey. There's actually an interesting detail where her and Rosalie go out to have lunch at Vesuvio, and Rosalie is toasting to their kids' relationship. And Carmela raises a glass, but it cuts away, and it doesn't look like she actually drank the alcohol. So I think that that's a sign again that she's really not happy about this relationship right now. Tony goes to talk to Jackie Jr. and tells him that he's happy that he's dating his daughter, but he expects the absolute best from Jackie. He needs to do well in school and especially not get involved in any trouble now that he's dating Tony's daughter. Jackie lies to him and says that he's doing well in school. He mentions he got a paper on his Edgar Allan Poe assignment, but it was actually Meadow that wrote the paper for him. And of course, Edgar Allan Poe is where the title of this episode comes from, The Telltale Heart. But they play around with that title here, and we'll see why coming up in a little bit. But Jackie, disobeys Tony. He gets a gun from Ralphie. He says it's for protection, but we can tell that Jackie is this, wannabe gangster type. So he's looking to get involved in trouble underneath Tony's nose. Later, Tony sees him at their casino gambling, and Tony throws him out and tells him, stay away from these kind of places. Don't get involved in this kind of stuff. Christopher buys Adriana a club. Basically, the owner owed him money. He made some bad sports bets, and now they took over the place. And he gives it to Adriana to run. She's always been interested in music and event management. So now this is her kind of playground. They turn it into the Crazy Horse. It's a bar club with live music. They start booking some bands. The band they book is kind of mellow, I think, for a club scene like that. I don't know, but that's kind of her whole thing. That was with the other band she was into. They were really mellow as well. There's a guy there named Matouche. He's a drug dealer, and he's going to be involved in later seasons as well. But we see him here dealing ecstasy in the bathroom. They kick him out because they don't want drugs in the place. They don't want to attract the cops' attention. Now he goes to Jackie Jr. for help. Jackie Jr. arranges this kind of little kid sit down where he agrees to work it out with Christopher for this guy. And there's an interesting detail where he's posed in a way that looks like Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Now, this could just be, a reference that the creators put to Godfather in there. But I like to think that Jackie intentionally sat that way to make himself look like Vito Corleone. Because, again, he wants to come off like a gangster. So I like to interpret that as, again, him being a wannabe and appearing a way that he's not actually. But he goes to Christopher to try and work it out for this guy. Christopher says no. Again, he doesn't want the drugs in his place, and he doesn't respect Jackie at all, so a favor is not something he's going to do for him. Jackie Jr. tells Matouche that everything is good anyway. He just has to deal his drugs outside of the club. And he does that, but then they still end up kicking his ass. So Jackie just got this guy in trouble by bluffing and pretending to be something he's not. Meanwhile, AJ breaks into his school's pool with some friends. They're just goofing around. Interesting detail is that Lady Gaga is one of the girls in that group. This was way before she was famous as a singer, but that's cool that she got her start here. Like a lot of other celebrities. I mentioned before that Michael B. Jordan was a little kid on this show in the first season. But they trash the pool. They throw things into it. They smash up the award locker. They just wreck the place. Just screwing around, just having fun. But they leave behind a pizza. And the cops are able to track this pizza to the pizza place owner. And they are able to coerce him into giving AJ's name. They say that he's going to be an accessory after the fact, which is pretty ridiculous. But this guy believes it. The scene at the pizza place is a little odd. The tone is kind of weird. I read on Wikipedia that it's a spoof of this TV series Dragnet. I never watched it, but an interesting detail is that the theme song for Dragnet is based on the song from The Killers, the film noir movie. I actually did a review of that movie. If you want to check it out, I'll link that in the description. But just it's funny what you read on Wikipedia as you click on all those links. AJ, though, his parents tell him that he's going to be punished and maybe even expelled and kicked off the football team. But when they go to the school, they don't want to punish him at all. Basically, football is more important to them than actually punishing AJ, which kind of pisses off Carmela. She wants to see him punished so that he'll learn his lesson. So instead of being punished at school, they end up grounding him for like a month, which again seems like kind of a light punishment for what he did. And this is the habit the Sopranos are in, where they're always letting their kids off the hook for the bad stuff that they get up to. In the last little storyline here, Tony and Gloria are continuing their relationship. They go to the zoo, and we get some hints about Gloria's character. We get some hints that she's a little bit crazy. One, she straight up says, I'm crazy for you. And again, that line, I'm crazy, is great foreshadowing. She also says offhandedly, poor you. And when she says it, we can see in Tony's eyes like a flash, like he looks worried for like a split second. I don't even think he realized why he's worried right then. But of course, this is subconsciously telling him that Gloria is like his mother. That was her catchphrase, oh, poor you. So even though he doesn't realize it yet, we're getting hints about her character and where she's going to go. And all of this is just setting up basically that she's mentally unstable. We learn later in her therapy session that she tried to commit suicide after her last breakup. So we know that things are just not going to end well with Tony. But we'll explore that more in episodes coming up. This was the Telltale Moozadell, and thank you guys so much for watching. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log, and today we're looking at the 10th episode of the 3rd season, To Save Us All from Satan's Power, which is a line from the Christmas song, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, which is fitting because this is the Christmas episode. So let's jump into things. So Tony is down by the shore where he has a flashback about Pussy. He remembers a time when they met down there to discuss the conflict between Jackie Aprile Sr. and Uncle Junior. So when the last boss of the family went away, there was a conflict between who was going to take over, Jackie or Junior. Junior was not happy about having to take orders from, someone younger than him. And funny enough, that ended up happening again with Tony. But Pussy goes down there to Boca to mediate the conflict and get Junior to agree to come to a sit down. But he ends up missing that sit down the day of, which is very suspicious. They also remember another time where he was, acting really suspicious around Christmas when he was dressed as Santa Claus, asking weird questions. And this leads them to think that Pussy was actually flipped in the year 1995. We've been told that Pussy was flipped in the year 1998, basically during the run of the 1st season. His handler, Skip Lipari, mentions this, and there's a couple other lines as well as a deleted scene, but that's not canon, so we can't take that as consideration. But the guys are thinking he might have got flipped in 95, and whether or not this is true, I don't think really matters so much as it is them, being paranoid and just thinking about, how much did they really give him and being worried about that right now. And again, Tony is really conflicted about how he feels about everything because, Pussy was a rat, but he loved the man. And he is feeling a lot of remorse and guilt for, having him killed. Meanwhile, though, Tony is stressed out about all the things he has to do for the holiday. He has to get gifts for everyone. They have to take stuff to Janice's house because they're going to have Christmas dinner there. And while he's there, he sees that Janice is really in pain from her beating by the guys that Svetlana sent to get her leg back. So he decides to do something nice for her for once and get revenge on the guy that hurt her. He goes to see his money launderer, a man named Slava. He's the head of the Russian mafia in Jersey. And while he's there, he asks for information about this guy and where to find him. This is also the first time we see Valeri, who is going to be really important in an episode coming up here. But, it's a pretty obscure episode that most people don't even remember, so not really any point talking about it right now. But Tony and Furio go and find this guy. They lure him away in the cab, and they end up beating him and leaving him in a store window. So that was his revenge for Janice. And when Janice sees this on the news, she's really touched that Tony would do this for her. So the guys are throwing a Christmas party for the neighborhood at Satriali's. They have this tradition where they have one of them dresses up like Santa Claus and gives gifts to all the children. Pussy was the one who usually did this, but now that he's dead, they need to find someone else to play him. They end up getting Bobby Baccalieri to do it, although he is incredibly shy and doesn't want to do it. And during the event, he ends up being really rude, and you can tell he's just not used to being in the public spotlight like this. So he's not a really good Santa Claus. But he gets into an argument with this little kid who is trying to get a second present, and it escalates, and the kid ends up saying, fuck you, Santa, to him. And the whole room just erupts into this classic Italian, oh! Really, really funny scene. They tell the kid to go back and apologize, which he does. And Bobby gives him another present. Again, just rewarding kids for terrible behavior. But legitimately one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in this show. Later, Tony and the gang go to another strip club to check out the competition. While he's there, he sees Jackie Jr. getting a lap dance from a stripper. Now, Tony's obviously really pissed off because he's dating his daughter. He takes him into the bathroom and just starts punching him. He ends up finding a gun that Jackie is carrying and tells him that, this is it. He reached rock bottom. He bottomed out. And he has basically ruined himself in Tony's eyes. Tony doesn't trust this kid anymore. The next day, the Sopranos are celebrating Christmas at their house, exchanging presents. Jackie Jr. actually comes over with presents for the family. And I'll give him credit for this. It's a ballsy move. He didn't try to hide from Tony. He just went over there and, talked to him directly. So I actually give him, respect points for that. But Tony tells him that, he hasn't decided yet what to do with him. He's still mulling things over, and he still wants to maintain his relationship with Meadow. He gives her a really nice present. Later, Meadow gives her dad a present, which he was a little surprised about since they've been fighting this whole year. But she gives him a big mouth Billy Bass, which I told you that was going to come back again. This, of course, is the thing that reminds him of Pussy, his dream with him as the talking fish. And Tony has to act like he likes it because he doesn't want anyone to know about this. But obviously the gift, really distresses him when he was already having all these feelings about Pussy already. So really funny ending. Great Christmas episode. I wish it was closer to the holidays when I reviewed this. But even still, thank you guys so much for watching. And stay tuned for the next Soprano log. Coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log, and today we're looking at the 11th episode of the 3rd season, Pine Barrens. Now, this episode pretty much entirely revolves around Tony's relationship with Gloria and Meadow's relationship with Jackie Jr. Anyway, that is the episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log. Coming soon. Nah, I'm just kidding. You guys know what this episode is. The most infamous episode of the entire series, except for maybe the finale. It's either considered to be one of the best or one of the worst episodes, depending on who you ask. And I think a lot of it has to do with how popular the episode is. It's become so popular that some fans basically think it's overrated. But I'll let you guys judge for that. Let's get into the episode. This is Pine Barrens. Now, Gloria returns from Morocco and she goes to see Tony on his boat. While he's gone, she answers the phone and it's Irina calling. She's drunk and calling him again. Tony lies about it and that really pisses Gloria off. She doesn't like the fact that, he lied to her, as well as it's kind of the fact he's seeing another woman, or he was seeing another woman too, that really sends her over the edge. So she gets pissed at him and throws his gift into the ocean and storms off. And again, we're seeing a different side to her than Tony is used to. Meanwhile, Tony sends Paulie to go collect Silvio's money from this guy, Valeri. We saw him last episode. He works for Slava, Tony's Russian associate. Paulie and Christopher go to his place, and Paulie is just incredibly rude to this guy, talking down to him. He ends up smashing the dude's universal remote, and this leads to a physical altercation. Again, it's entirely Paulie's fault. He starts it, he throws the first punch, and they end up having to, choke him with a lamp, and they think they killed him. So they put him in the trunk and decide to drive him out to the Pine Barrens, where nobody will find this guy. Paulie and Christopher arrive in the woods. Their plan is to, use a shovel and dig a grave for him. But when they open the trunk, they see that this guy is still alive. So they end up taking him out into the woods, into the snow, and forcing him to dig his own grave at gunpoint. But these guys, in typical fashion, mess it up. He manages to hit Christopher with the shovel and manages to run away. They start chasing him through the snow and shooting at him. And it looks like Paulie's manages to hit him in the head. We see blood spurt off, but they aren't able to find the body. It just disappears. And meanwhile, the fact that they've run around makes them lost. So now they're somewhere in the Jersey Pine Barrens with no idea how to get back. Tony goes to see Slava. He's really worried because, he doesn't know what Slava knows. He doesn't know what the situation is. So he's worried he could be walking into a trap. But Slava doesn't know anything, but he is worried about his friend. He's, addicted to drugs, and this guy saved his life in Chechnya. Slava reveals that he was an ex-Russian commando. And this really worries Tony that, he might survive. So he calls Paulie and tells him 100% this guy cannot come back. And of course, we get, one of the most infamous, if not the most infamous lines from the series.
You're not going to believe this. He killed 16 Czechoslovakians. Guy was an interior decorator. His house looked like shit.
And yeah, that's really why this episode is so popular. It's just incredibly funny, the dialogue in here, the lines they come up with, and the premise of, Paulie and Christopher lost in the woods. It's definitely more of a standalone episode, but the humor and the characters just completely pop in this episode. But one interesting detail that I noticed is that Slava is drinking Grey Goose, which seems weird to me as, this old school Russian guy, that he'd be drinking French vodka. I've read some explanations that maybe, he was trying to be more Western and drinking a more Western vodka, or it might be the fact that the Sopranos had some kind of deal with Grey Goose. We see it a couple of times in the series that people drink it. But I just noticed that detail, and I thought it was a little bit out of character for an old school Russian guy to be doing that. Meanwhile, Meadow and Jackie Jr. are continuing to date, but Meadow is starting to notice that Jackie Jr. is really stupid. They're playing a game of Scrabble, and he picks the dumbest words ever to try to score points. But when he doesn't show up one night to her dorm, she gets suspicious, and she borrows a friend's car to go investigate. She finds him and finds that he was sleeping with a hooker. So she's obviously heartbroken by this. She breaks up with him. And Jackie Jr. just, fucked up his relationship. Again, trying to be this player, trying to be this guy who, sleeps with a lot of women like the gangsters do. But it blew up in his face this time, and he lost out on pretty much the best girl he could ever hope to be with. Meanwhile, Paulie and Chris are stranded in the woods for the night. It's freezing and cold, and they manage to find shelter in this old broken down van in the middle of the woods. They're forced to eat ketchup packets and relish from this old bag from God knows when, but they're starving, and this is something for them to eat. And we're seeing some conflict brew between the two. Paulie's trying to blame the whole thing on Christopher when it's entirely his fault, and they're obviously tired and exhausted, and it almost erupts into a physical confrontation between the two. Meanwhile, Gloria and Tony make up. They decide to have dinner together at her house. He arrives really late because of a family emergency. And then after they have sex, he gets called by Paulie, who tells him to come and get them. So he tells her he has to leave, and she just completely freaks out about this. She ends up throwing a steak at him. And again, we're seeing more of that craziness that's the other side of her character. Tony and Bobby drive out to the woods. They manage to find Christopher and Paulie the next morning. But when they get back to the spot where Paulie's car was, the car is stolen with all the money that was inside of it. Now, they don't know who stole it. It might be some kids. It could be the Russian guy if he managed to survive. So we're left to wonder, what really happened. But regardless of the situation, Tony's just incredibly disappointed with Paulie. He fucked up. Even all of Paulie's excuses, Tony can tell that he's being bullshitted. Paulie put him in a situation that could be bad for him, especially because of his relationship with Slava. So we're going to see that relationship go downhill between him and Paulie moving forward. In the end, though, they decide, the guy's probably dead, so they decide to just go home. And yeah, that's where the episode ends. Now, the one question that gets asked more than anything is, what happened to the Russian guy? Now, there's some theories. Some people think that, he climbed up into a tree, and that's why they weren't able to find him. There's been some interviews where some of the writers have talked about it. There was originally going to be a scene where we see him later on, the Russian guy, and he would have brain damage from being shot in the head, so he doesn't remember, what happened. Chase has said in a couple interviews that in the back of his mind, the guy was found by some Boy Scouts, and they managed to get him back to his boss, who sent him back to Russia. But the point is that it doesn't really matter what happened to the Russian. Sopranos is not a show that's about answering every single plot point. It's more just about the characters and the experience of the show. So in the end, these plot details are not really important to the creators. And it doesn't really matter where the Russian ended up. But like I said, this is definitely probably the most famous episode of the show, except for maybe the finale. So I hope you guys enjoyed this recap, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog, coming soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog, and today we're looking at the 12th episode of the 3rd season, Amour Fou, or as Tony says it, Amour Fou, which translates to crazy love, which we can definitely see going on in this episode. So let's jump into things. The episode opens with Carmela and Meadow going to an art museum. Carmela has to borrow a tampon from Meadow because she's spotting, which she fears either means she has ovarian cancer or she's pregnant. Both outcomes she's very fearful about. She gets very emotional at seeing this painting of a very innocent baby. Later on, she gets emotional again seeing a commercial for a dog food brand. So she's getting very emotional at the idea of young babies or innocent creatures. And the reason for that is because she thinks that she might be pregnant, and she's very conflicted about, her life ever since she saw the psychiatrist. So she goes to see another priest. This priest is getting a doctorate in psychology as well, and talks to him about her fears. She fears that she is going to hell because of what she's done to support Tony in his illegal activity, and she fears bringing another life into their life of crime. The priest tells her that she can't leave Tony, but instead she needs to, set her boundaries and only live off the money that Tony makes that she's comfortable with, which, is just not going to work at all. You can't compartmentalize that kind of stuff. But again, the Catholic Church is all about the family staying together and being against divorce, so this is his best solution. It's the complete opposite of what the therapist she saw told her, and that seemed like much better advice, much more practical advice for her to leave Tony. But this lets her keep on living her wealthy life, so this is the advice she chooses to go with instead. And then when she goes to see a doctor, the doctor is able to confirm that she doesn't have cancer, she's not pregnant, she just has a small thyroid condition. So she's fine, and like a lot of things on this show, she chooses to continue to live her life in a way that makes her comfortable. Meanwhile, Tony continues to see Gloria. We're seeing an erratic side to her. She's complaining to Tony about all the things that's going on in her life. And of course, in typical Tony fashion, he's not really listening. He just kind of wants to talk about his own problems. But we see how kind of manic she is. She goes from like incredibly depressed to happy again. And we're just seeing another side to her behavior. One night when they're together, her tires are slashed, and Tony thinks that it might have been his ex-girlfriend, Irina. This really pisses her off when he's, defending her, and it leads to a big fight between the two of them. Later, she sees Carmela at the dealership and decides to give Carmela a ride home so she can kind of learn more about Carmela, and also, she's trying to provoke Tony with this. So when she's in the car with Carmela, she's talking to her, asking questions. She starts speeding and, driving really erratically. And then she's kind of subtly mocking Carmela, hinting that she's just a homemaker. She doesn't have any independence, unlike her. So we can just see how crazy she really is. When Tony learns about this, he's absolutely furious that she talked to his wife. He storms down there and drags her into her office. And there's a great little detail we can see is when he slams her against the wall, she licks her lips. Like, she's turned on by this conflict. She very much intentionally wanted to make Tony angry, and we'll see why a little bit later. But yeah, just crazy, like a moth drawn to a flame. She's looking for conflict. But he breaks up with her because he realizes how unstable she is and that she's going to get him caught. Later, she calls him sobbing and, begs him to come over, which he does. He tries to break up with her really gently, but she flips out, starts yelling at him. And he realizes then that she reminds him of his mother. She says, "Oh, poor you. She's this black pit of darkness." And Tony sees that she's exactly like his mother. She threatens to tell his family about the two of them if he leaves her. And this leads to a huge fight. It gets really physical. He slams her onto the ground and is choking her, about to kill her. And she's begging him to do it. She's like, "Kill me, kill me." She wants to die by his hands. She's suicidal. But Tony manages to restrain himself and he leaves. Later, he sends Patsy to go intimidate her. He tells her that if she ever tries to contact Tony or his family, he's the one who's going to kill her, not Tony. So he's basically saying, even if you want to die at Tony's hands, that's not going to happen. I'm going to be the one who's going to do it. You're never going to interact with Tony again. Just trying to dissuade her from doing anything stupid and trying to, provoke Tony into killing her. The last little storyline happening in this episode is Jackie Jr. and Dino talk to Ralph. They learn from him that the way that Tony and Jackie's father got, respect and attention is they robbed Feech LaManna's card game. Now, we learned about this in Season 2 from Richie Aprile, and of course, in Season 5, we're going to actually meet Feech. But again, this is a plot detail that they've been establishing for a while. And they decide that, they want respect too. They're nothing right now. They've been humiliated time and time again. And they decide to step up and rob a card game in order to get attention. And they actually decide to rob Ralph's card game, even though they're kind of working for him right now. So they bust in on the game. Christopher and Furio are playing there. The dealer, Sunshine, who we met in Season 2, is heckling the robbers. He's just kind of mocking them. After a tense kind of standoff, Jackie ends up shooting the guy in the chest and killing him. This leads to a big shootout. Furio is shot into confusion. Jackie and Dino manage to get out of the building, but their driver, who I just realized is Matouche, so they got him to drive for them. And of course, he's not really sympathetic to Jackie, so when he hears the gunshots going off, he drove off and left them. So they're stranded there. Jackie manages to hijack a car and get away, but Dino is captured and they execute him. They end up calling Dr. Freed, the Jewish penis doctor that we met in Season 2, to patch Furio up. So we can see that, that's his relationship with the mob, and that's why he can attend these card games and stuff, is because he does favors for these guys when they need a medical assistance. So later, Tony and Ralph meet to discuss Jackie Jr. They discuss the possibility of giving him a pass, but the subtext of the scene is that they both realize that Jackie's going to have to die, but they're trying to push the blame onto each other. Neither one of them wants to be the one to make the decision, because they were friends with his father, and it's complicated by all these personal relationships. Each one wants the other one to give the order, but Tony manages to be a little bit more manipulative, and he basically pushes the blame all onto Ralph and says, it's your decision, and basically reminds him of how humiliated he'll be if this kid managed to disrespect him like that and get away with it. So at the end, Ralph is the one who has to, take care of Jackie, which again is complicated by the fact that he's dating his mother. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Jackie next episode, the Season 3 finale. I'm so excited to review that, and stay tuned for that Sopranolog coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I'm back with another Sopranolog. Today we are looking at the Season 3 finale, Army of One. And as always, at the end of these seasons, I like to take a brief moment just to thank you all for continuing to watch these videos. It really means so much for me to have you guys be enjoying the content and allowing me to continue to make these videos for you all. So thank you guys so much. You are awesome. And if you'll allow me to indulge myself for one moment, I just wanted to quickly plug, you can follow me on Twitter if you ever want updates on my videos, as well as any news about the channel, I can post it there. I also have a Patreon for anyone who wants to support the channel. Going to allow me to continue to make these videos. You'll get early access to all of my content, as well as at the higher tier, I'll give you a shout out at the end of the video, which I'm going to do in this one as well. But that's it for now. Let's jump into the episode. This is Army of One. AJ and his friend break into the school so that they can steal the answers for an upcoming test. There's a lot of pressure on them to get good grades, and they think that this is the only way that they can pass the test. While they're waiting, they end up peeing at the crime scene, which the dean of the school later uses as a bluff to get AJ and his friend to admit it was them. He says they have their DNA, and they believe this, so they admit it was them, when in reality, DNA tests take much longer than this, and I'm unsure of how they would even have AJ's DNA to test it against. But the point is, AJ's stupid and he falls for this bluff. But with the proof that it was them, the dean has them expelled. And Tony is just incredibly pissed off by this. There's a lot of things going on in his life right now that stresses him out. And on top of that, now his son, is expelled. And he wants to send AJ to military school. He thinks the discipline will, set him straight and get him back on the right track. Meanwhile, Jackie Jr. goes to hide in the housing projects. It's low-income housing. He thinks that the mob won't look for him there. And he ends up staying with, I don't know the character's name, but he's played by the same actor who played Omar in The Wire and a bunch of other things. I think this was before The Wire, though, so this might be one of his first big roles. While he's there, Jackie Jr. tries calling Tony for help, but Tony refuses to listen. He doesn't want to know anything because, again, he doesn't want any responsibility for Jackie's death. He wants Ralph to take care of it. And so Tony refuses to listen to him. This is just an interesting detail. I'm not sure where else to put it, so I'll put it here. In therapy, Tony refers to Jackie Jr. as 22 years old, but earlier in the season when he had to sit down with Ralph, Ralph said he was 23 years old. So I'm not sure if this is a continuity error, or it might just be the fact that these guys don't really know Jackie's age. Again, it would kind of fit that they're, not really paying attention to their loved ones' lives, and so they just might be not sure of how old he actually is. But meanwhile, Paulie puts his mother in the Green Grove retirement community. It's a retirement community, not a nursing home, but it's the same one that Tony put his mother in. And so Paulie, wants to give his mother the best because he's a mama's boy and he really loves his mother. But in order to do this, he needs a lot of money. Green Grove is very expensive. He does a job with Ralph. He gives Ralph the security codes for this safe. But Ralph says that he doesn't have to pay Paulie because it was him that did all the work. So he requests to sit down to resolve this issue. Tony hears him out, but he ends up siding with Ralph. Again, probably because Ralph is bringing in a lot more money than Paulie. So Paulie only walks away with around $12,000, which isn't enough for Green Grove. This leads to a lot of resentment on Paulie's part. And Johnny sees this as an opportunity. So he goes to talk to Paulie and present himself as a friend. He even lies and says that Carmine, the boss of one of the 5 families, cares about Paulie, when in reality, he doesn't even know who he is. But this is just Johnny using Paulie as a way to get information by pretending to be his friend. I've noticed that more than any other seasons 3 and 4 are very connected. We're seeing a lot of things set up in this finale, which are going to be major plot points in season 4. So one of them is, of course, Paulie's relationship with Johnny and feeding him information about the New Jersey family. Another thing that's going to be brought up more is that the FBI decide that they want to use an undercover agent to get information. They think that Adriana might be a weak spot in the family for them to exploit. And so they send this young agent, Deborah Cicerone, undercover to pretend to be, her friend. So she dresses up, like Adriana does with the huge hair and the clothes. And again, presents herself as a friend. And they end up connecting. It's crazy how much detail that Adriana just gives away instantly to the stranger. But again, I think that's because Adriana is just such an innocent person. She doesn't even think that, this could be a trap. But we'll see that play out more next season as well. Jackie and Omar's kid, again, that's not the character's name, but I don't remember the name. To me, he's Omar. But him and Omar's kid are playing chess. And of course, Jackie's losing to a child because he's a total idiot. And then Omar tells him that instead of giving up on a chess game, he should have played it out because that's the only way he's going to learn. And I think that's a great summary of Jackie Jr.'s life. He gives up whenever there's a challenge and he looks for the easy route instead of, being diligent and playing things out. And he could have had a good life as a medical student, dating mezzo-soprano. But again, he just gave up way too early and looked for easy ways out. And we see it bite him in the ass in this episode. So when Jackie Jr. is going for a walk, Vito pops up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. And just a reminder that Vito and him are cousins. They're related. And still, Vito was perfectly fine pulling the trigger and killing this kid. So that is the end of Jackie Jr. and the last of the April men that we'll see in this show. Tony and Carmela take AJ to visit the Hudson Military Academy where they're thinking of sending him. The dean of the school there, talks to AJ about, what their school is all about, discipline, regard for the institution rather than the self. But Tony is really excited about all the discipline at the school. He thinks it'll be good for AJ. Carmela's really worried. She doesn't want the school to train him to be a soldier and a killer. She wants to continue to coddle AJ. But they both agree to send him there. They don't want him to end up like Jackie Jr., but while he sees himself in the military uniform, he ends up passing out, and they learn that he suffers from the same panic attacks that Tony does. So the soprano curse is passed on to him as well. So the pediatrician says that he can't go to the school, and they're really left wondering, what are they going to do for this kid? How do they stop him from becoming a loser and potentially ending up just like Jackie Jr. did? At Jackie Jr.'s wake, very few people show up. Now that Jackie Sr. is dead and no longer the boss, people just don't really care anymore. And it just goes to show you how fickle things are in this life, that one minute you could be the boss and then the next minute your family's destroyed and no one cares about you. At the grave site, there's a really funny scene. The police show up and arrest Silvio and some others, intentionally, I think, doing it in the middle of a funeral just to cause them more grief. And when Uncle Junior sees this, he runs away into the car and ends up almost leaving Bobby behind. So just a really comical scene. But again, so tragic that this is happening in the middle of what's supposed to be a moment of grief for the family. At the April house, Meadow is drinking with Jackie's sister and their cousin. The sister says that, it was the mafia that killed Jackie, but Meadow argues against this. She defends her family. She really goes back and forth this episode. To outsiders, she defends the family and says that they had nothing to do with it. But when she's alone, she sees the hypocrisy of their lifestyle and realizes that that is really what had Jackie killed, is their family's connection to the mafia. At dinner, Uncle Junior starts to sing this Italian song, Cor Negrato, I think it's how it's pronounced, but it translates to ungrateful heart. It's a really beautiful scene, and we can see a lot of characters, gathering around and being emotional, even crying at the song. But again, it just highlights the hypocrisy of them all, because at least all the mobsters know full well that they're the ones that had Jackie killed. And now they're having this bonding moment at his funeral. But again, not really even caring about Jackie, just it's self-indulgent. And this really pisses Meadow off. She's drunk. She starts acting out. And then she runs away when Tony tries to confront her. And so we're left wondering where she's going and, how she's going to react to, this lifestyle of theirs. And as the episode ends with them all watching Uncle Junior sing, the music fades out into these different songs. There's like a Chinese song and a French and Spanish song. It's really jarring. And I've read that David Chase put that in there as a statement about music, how it can be used to manipulate people. And again, we can see that in this scene. The music, it's beautiful and it's sad, and it can lead you to think that this is a sad, beautiful moment on the show. But I think the creator just really wanted to highlight that, this means nothing. Their grief doesn't mean anything. It's just a performance. And this musical fading highlights it, that it's a reminder that music can manipulate your emotions into feeling whatever the song wants you to feel. So that is the end of season 3. Really interesting how much stuff it sets up for the next seasons. We're going to see how close and connected these 2 seasons are. But again, thank you guys so much for watching and sticking with these videos. And I can't wait to do the next season of Sopranologs, coming very soon. Thanks. Special thank you to my patrons who helped make this video happen: Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham Favang, and Rooftop. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.